Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me today I have Dan. How are you, Dan?
Yeah, I'm going all right. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. It's a strange time at the moment. It seems as if the weeks are going quite quickly, but the days seem to drag on, so it's a very strange sort of space that we find ourselves in, I guess. It doesn't feel that long ago that we're recording the last episode of this.
It's all everything's happening. Yeah, it is. You're right. It's weird. It's a weird time. There's, so that hours are going slowly, but days are going quickly, and days are
Yeah,
going slowly, but weeks are going quickly. It's all
yeah.
very strange.
Very, very weird. So in our last edition of this, where we had a look at the defenders and goalkeepers at Hull City for this season, and sort of gave our views on them, our assessment of their worth to the team going forward and for this season. And this week we're going to look at the midfielders. So we've got a group of midfielders to look at today. We've excluded Jared Bowen and Camille Grzycki because they're no longer at the club. Of course, they'd probably feature pretty prominently in our reviews, with pretty glowing reviews, I would think. But we're going to look at the players still at the club, and we'll start with a player who's actually, I believe, the longest-serving senior player at the club. So we've got a few youth players in this side, but in terms of signings, I think Kevin Stewart was the first signing. Well, the signing Slutsky signed the longest time ago that's still at the club, if that sort of makes sense. He was a £4 million signing from Liverpool, and in some ways was sort of part of the Andy Robertson deals. So I think he's sort of unfairly caught some stick to start with, where obviously we thought we didn't get the sort of fee that we really should have got for Robertson, where we only got about $8 million for him, and I think paid $4 million or something like that for Stewart. But in these sorts of deals where players go back and forth, it's always hard to keep track of the actual value of the player. But he sort of had a mixed start to his career at City, but certainly this season, and we've discussed in previous episodes that he became such an important part of the team, and unfortunately suffered a pretty bad injury that kept him out until about February. But still managed to make 17 starts in the league so far this season with 2 goals and an assist. How have you found his season, Dan?
As you sort of mentioned, this season for Stewart's been much more significant than previous seasons. I think to start the season, he quite quickly established himself in those first handful of games as probably as a lock in that midfield, one of those midfield positions, and as probably as one of those two holding midfielders. But I don't know. I think he's just we seem to have a lot of these players that seem to be having quite unfortunate injury runs, and I think that's sort of what's been probably most frustrating about Kevin Stewart so far. Is he's just sort of been. I mean, the first couple of seasons was sort of in and out with injury, and never really was able to stake a real claim as a first teamer. And then this season started like a house on fire, and was that lock, and then another unfortunate injury has kept him out, but was back in the fold when everything sort of once this all this situation all started, and now we're where we are now. But no, I think he's been very good this season. Even with the limited games, I still think he's one of those one of the better performing of the midfields.
Yeah, it seems as if, generally speaking, it was sort of two of the three out of Batty, Stewart, and Lopez sort of played those more holding, or not even really holding midfield, but more the box-to-box midfield position, whereas, you had your Irvine and Terrells and so on who played more of the advanced, Honeyman as well sort of played the more advanced role in that trio of central midfielders that we would deploy. As you say, though, really sort of started to come into his own this season, and at the start of the season, I think quite a lot of people were considering him almost the most important player in the team. So a real turnaround in his fortunes after a sort of rough start to his career at City. I think he's one of a handful of players that have the option to extend his contract in the club's favour, and of course with the current situation it's a bit strange. I think initially the terms of those extensions was that they had to be triggered by March. I haven't heard anything about that. Presumably that's because there's a whole lot of extenuating circumstances that mean that that's not necessarily the case. Would you be hoping that we extend the deal by a year? Would you be looking at offering him a new deal for 2 or 3 years, or how are you sort of viewing the situation going forward?
I I would be very happy if the club were able to hold on to him. I'd have no hesitation in offering him a new contract for another, maybe 3 years or so. I think it's, he had, what do you have, a broken foot or something was what has kept him out this year. So, it's when it's something like that, I'm not necessarily particularly worried about, reoccurrence of injury. It's when they, with some of these other guys that have been struck down repeatedly with those soft tissue injuries that get you a bit worried. But I think, he had a pretty high reputation in the youth ranks at Liverpool, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And some were actually surprised that he never really broke into them at all, really. And then I think there was a few that said, we'd actually picked up a pretty good player, even though I think there was probably some that said otherwise as well. But I think he's been, I think he's been pretty good overall for us. And I wouldn't have any hesitation. I'd be pretty hopeful that we do, at a minimum, take up the option to extend on current terms. But I'd be looking to extend, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Another one in the same boat is Dan Batty, who has come through the youth team for us. He's one of those where, in the last year or two, he's really broken through, and I wouldn't even consider him a youth player or a young player anymore. He's just one of the squad. He's basically, arguably more experienced than someone like a Lopez. I'm pretty sure he's older than Lopez, and he's considered a senior player. So Batty's really sort of taken his chance in his stride. And a funny story about Batty was that when I was playing would have been back in, I don't know, FIFA 13 or something. It would have been ages ago. He was one of the young players that I'd rotate through in a cup game or something, and he'd play really well, so I'd keep him on in the first team. And that's how I first his name sort of came around the periphery of my awareness. So it's funny to see that he's actually managed to break through into the senior side, and that's some of those names sort of stick with you for various reasons, and that's the reason his has stuck with me. And he's managed 13 starts with 8 sub appearances, so that's 21 appearances for the season in the leagues, not too bad. And he's got a goal to his name as well. So he's another who's probably I probably wouldn't put him in the best 5 players of the season, but he's been reasonably consistent when he's played, and he's probably delivered what was expected of him.
Yeah, I think there's a part of me that thinks he's probably outperforming my expectations for a guy with his level of experience. As you say, he's not necessarily inexperienced, but he still is in really the first. I think this is really his first full season of senior football. I think he sort of came through a little bit last year, and he featured fairly prominently towards the back end of last season.
Yeah,
is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I think, and he's probably been a little bit unlucky. I think he had a couple of back issues this year, which has sort of kept him from getting probably a few more games. I think he had a couple of issues like that. And there was something else, but I can't remember. But no, I think I've been pretty happy with him. I think it's always nice to have the guys that do progress from the youth team into the first, and he's pretty much from the first time he stepped in, he's never really looked out of place. Just normal, some up and downs, but I think he works real hard, and he's got a really good eye for a pass. So yeah, he's a good one, and one again. If I'm not sure what his current deal is, but I'd be hoping that he's another that we keep, for a while. He's really growing into a very capable player at this level, and one of those sort of guys that, if you can get the right guys in the midfield, he could definitely be. If he could get a partnership, he's definitely him and Stewart or something like that would form a very good, very capable midfield.
Yeah, and here's hoping it's not another Josh Tyman or Max Clark situation where, because he's progressed from the youth ranks, we sort of try and undersell them on contracts and they end up walking away. But yeah, I think he's at least deserving of the contract extension, and hopefully another 2 or 3 year deal would be great. You sort of alluded to the next player a little bit in your comments on Kev Stewart, and apparently, well, I should say unfortunately, with John Terrell, his history of soft tissue injuries really haven't done him any favours at City, and it's surprising when you look at the fact that we spent £3 million on him. Probably, I mean, it's a little unfair because I think his talent level certainly demands that sort of fee, but I think the amount of game time that we've seen from him certainly hasn't met that expectation. When he's playing, and I think it was earlier this season as well as last season, when he's fit, and I think he was getting assists, several games in a row and scoring goals and all that sort of thing, and he's a very good attacking creative player and really unlocks teams. And when the team was flying and he was in the side, he was such an important player in the team. And then, of course, he comes back for a couple of appearances and then he's out again with another soft tissue injury. So I think he's one that's out of contract this season as well. And I think he's one sort of in the same vein as a Stephen Kingsley, for instance, where I think we could be pretty confident in assuming that the club's not going to extend the deal.
Yeah, I think you're right. He's probably going to be an unfortunate victim of circumstance. His injury record does sort of speak against him. It's an interesting argument when you put his injury record against his talent, which he undoubtedly has. But yeah, I think he's probably, because he signed from Arsenal, so he's probably on a decent. We'd be on a decent wage package. He's probably one of the higher earners left in the squad, I'd imagine. So, I mean, when you add those sort of things together, it sort of you would imagine that he is probably going to be, as you mentioned, one that is probably left to join the free agency ranks. But
which is a real shame. I think. Yeah, it's a real shame considering his talent level.
Yeah, I think under different circumstances, he could have been he could have really been an absolute star for us. Like we've seen, as you said, we've seen glimpses, but just unfortunately we haven't been able to see it regularly enough. Because I think there's been times where we've relied on Bowen and Grosicki a lot, and there's been times now that they're gone particularly, and we've needed a really strong creative player to unlock those teams, and if he had been available for an extended period of time, I think he really could have shown his value. But it's just been unfortunate that he's been succumbed to injury so frequently.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on to the next of our permanent players. We'll do the loans as a batch at the end of this list, but the next player on the list is George Honeyman, who we signed from Sunderland in the summer, I believe. I mean, it was virtually a free deal. I think it was something like £400,000 according to the Hull Daily Mail. And he's made 16 starts and 17 sub-appearances. So he's featured in almost all of our games, I think. Probably just missed the 4 games, I think it is. He's got a goal and 2 assists to his name as well. And he's one who I'm sort of a mixed opinion of. I think he kind of came in with a reasonably decent reputation, because I seem to remember him debuting for Sunderland in the Premier League, and then he was obviously captain for them last season in League One as well. So he's one who has a decent amount of experience playing. I think it would have been over 100 times for Sunderland's senior team. But, you sort of have to question if he's part of a side that's been relegated twice. What necessarily is his level? What's his ceiling? And I'd say that, look, towards the end of the last couple of months, he certainly started to step up a little bit, and he's certainly impressed me a lot more. But I think his form has been quite patchy through the season, and he hasn't quite convinced me yet.
Yeah, my sort of opinion on Honeyman is like lots of endeavour. He works real hard, but he really lacks I think he really lacks a cutting edge or any sort of finish. He does put in a shift, and you can't deny how hard he works. And it doesn't matter whether he's been put on like wide left a couple of times and stuff, and he does work hard, and he does, he puts in a shift. But it just, there's just sloppy passes and poor crossing and things just that let him down, I think. But I mean, Yeah, he does. He has, he has played in the Premier League. He has captained Sunderland. There's something there, and I think you're right. He was starting to show a little bit more before the uh, ceasement of the season, I suppose. Hopefully, if we're lucky, it'll resume at some point. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think I'm sort of with you. I'm a mixed bag, and I'm really unsure how to grade him, or what scale I should be grading him on.
Yeah, yeah. So he's one of a few that have 2 years left on their deal. Another one of those is Leo Lopez, who I think you'd have in the conversation certainly, and you'd almost have him as the player of the season. I think he's one who, sort of like Elder, comparisons between the two are quite similar, I would say, where he came in on deadline day, same as Elder, I believe, from Wigan, where I think he was being played as a wide player, might have even been at right back or something like that. And they basically said that he was rubbish. He was too lightweight. He wasn't really going to make it. I think he's only 19 or 20 years old as well. So very, very young player, and one that was really sort of out of the blue. But he has excelled in that central midfield position. And I think of the game against Chelsea, for instance, in the FA Cup, where I was a guest on a Chelsea podcast where they were raving about their young player whose name's escaped me, the Scottish Billy something will come to me. But I thought Lopez was right up with him as being one of the best players on the pitch. Billy Gilmore, that was it. Where his ability just his composure on the ball, his ability to maintain possession through midfield and spray some really lovely passes around the pitch. And he backed it up with another great display against Leeds a couple of weeks later, where even though we were pretty comprehensively beaten, he was still one of the best players on the pitch, I think. So it's sort of testament to the fact that he's had such a great season that I think it was in the January window, was it New York Red Bulls, I think, came in with well over £1 million as an offer for him, and we turned them down. And I know I'm sort of hoping we're not going to live to regret that. Hopefully he goes on to even bigger and better things. But he's sort of, you look at the tactics that we've used in our signings of trying to buy these, lesser known, unproven young players who we can sort of give a 2 or 3 year deal to, develop them for a year or so, and then hopefully sell them on for a really big fee. Hasn't quite worked out for a number of the players, but he's probably one where you only have to hit 1 in 4, 1 in 5, and if you can turn a pretty decent profit on them, you probably recoup your money on all of them. And he's certainly had a great season.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit it all on the head there. He has been very impressive for a guy that I basically hadn't heard of him before he signed. I didn't recognize the name. I just basically put it down to he had played under McCann somewhere else.
Yeah, I think it might have been at Peterborough.
Yeah. So I just put it down to another one that, a guy that he knows. So he's just brought him in. But no, he's surprised me a lot for a guy of his age to have done so well. And you're right. How composed he is and how skillful he is was something that took me by surprise. He works really hard. And he creates some really good opportunities to break free from that midfield and move forward. Worked really well when we had some dynamic wide players that we're not going to mention, but I think he has definitely been one of the performers of the season. And as you mentioned, that to have a guy you buy a essentially unknown player, and then within 6 months, another club's going to come in and offer you double or double and a bit, triple what you paid. There's obviously something there that now other people are starting to see.
Yeah, no, definitely. So hopefully he can continue to improve and excel at the club. One who's had sort of mixed reviews this season, but has certainly been value for money compared to the likes of John Terrell, unfortunately. Jackson Irvine signed for £2 million from Burton Albion back 2 seasons ago now. It was sort of in that spree of signings of players who scored against us, and he joined us to give us an Aussie at the club, which was great to see, and has even had the fortune of captaining the club for periods this season. So he's made 34 league starts this season with a sub appearance as well, so just missed the 2 games. With 2 league goals and an assist, I think he'd probably be a bit disappointed with that return. I know at Burton and at other clubs, Jackson's sort of had a bit more of a prolific return. So only the 2 goals this season is probably a bit unfortunate. I know, there's plenty of opportunities that I can think that come to mind where he's sort of hit the post or, hit the crossbar or something like that, or he's just missed a chance. So he's certainly been giving it his all from corners and that sort of thing. I think mixed reviews for him have sort of come because I think he's, and it's sort of how we see him when he's at the Socceroos as well. He's one of those players who can sort of be played along a whole lot of different positions, where he sort of becomes a jack of all trades, master of none, which sort of works against him, where he's good at keeping the engine ticking over. He's good at kind of giving us that grit and determination in midfield and that effort and that pressure. So sort of, I guess, in the same mold as a David Myler, I'd say. Not the same player necessarily, but the same sort of role where he's that sort of heartbeat. But when we're getting smashed or when things aren't going our way, it then makes that player a very easy scapegoat, because they're sort of looked at as, he's just passing sideways, or he's just, passing the ball around. He's not really doing anything with it. But that's just when the game's not going in your favour, that's just sort of sometimes the role you get reduced to. And I think he's sort of copped a lot of flack for that. But for what we paid for him, he's made over 100 appearances for us, and he's been a great player over the last 3 seasons. And I would certainly hope that he can stay at the club for a few seasons more.
I'm certainly with you there. I think I'd be happy to see him re-sign. I think he's been a good servant for the club, and I sort of, as you mentioned, he works hard. I guess just lacking a little bit of composure in some key moments. I can remember a few just absolutely awful misses this season. Being in the 6-yard box, and I think he put it wide of the post, and just some really weird, just very strange attempts to finish. But I think overall, like, he offers us, like, he's very strong in the air. He offers us, he's between, I think it's basically off corners, it would be him and Device that probably get most of that first ball that comes in the box if it's a City player. They're the only 2 that seem to really attack the ball that's in the air. So he offers us something. I think I'm probably a bit disappointed, like you, that he hasn't been able to sort of tick over a few more goals. He certainly got himself into positions to do so. But, to be handed the captain's armband obviously shows where he sits within that. He's made the most starts of any of the midfielders. So he's obviously rated by McCann and by the people that are at the club in some regard. So I would be, I'd expect that he would re-sign or extend, and I'd have no problems with that. I think he's been quite good. Just lacking a little bit of finesse at times.
Yeah, certainly. Well, we'll move on then to the loan signings, and I guess start with the first of the batch, which was Josh Bowler signed in the summer from Everton on loan for the season. And I guess he's one that was a bit of a victim of circumstance, because I think he was sort of brought in as backup for Bowen if he was ever to be injured during the season, and of course he wasn't. So opportunities were pretty far and few between for Josh. But I found at times when we played Bowen as the furthest man forward in that front 3, and Bowler then got starts on the right-hand side, that was actually... It worked quite well for him. I think it made Bowen a little bit less effective, but certainly it gave Bowler an opportunity to shine. He's only managed 1 league goal for us, though, for the season. And by all reports, if we were to sign him from Everton, it'd cost something in the region of £5 million. So I think pretty confident in saying that we're not going to be signing him in the summer. But, as far as a backup option, reasonably okay. 15 sub-appearances, 8 league starts, so 23 appearances all up. It's not too bad for him.
Yeah, look, he's been... The first couple of games he played, I was really underwhelmed. He didn't seem to offer a lot, but he certainly started to show... It has improved and shown, that he's certainly capable at this level. But as you mentioned, that high fee is certainly a deterrent. I don't think he certainly hasn't shown enough to warrant a £5 million transfer. But I think I think he'll certainly have a successful career. He just it probably won't be at Everton, but um, good luck to him. Hopefully he can get either moved on to another, probably a championship club. I think he's capable at this level. He just needs to actually be able to get a serious run of games. He has the ability to that he will be able to break into another side. I think it won't be he's not going to sign for a Leeds or something and break into there, but someone like Borough or something like that. I could see him. They've probably a little bit disappointing this year, but I think a mid-table team that needs something maybe just a little bit different to try and push them forward. I think he could certainly add something to a team that's looking for something like that. But yeah, I think he's just another one who's been unfortunate. I think there's a part of when he was signed that we maybe expected that there was going to be some serious bids come in for either Grisicky or Bowen, and when those didn't sort of eventuate, and then he was definitely stuck behind them. So, and then they basically didn't get injured. I mean, which was great for us at the time, but unfortunate for him.
Yeah, definitely. Signed in the January window, Herbie Kane from Liverpool, and there's a bit of, I'd say there's a reasonable level of hype around him, only because I think we'd been after him in the summer as well, and he'd done pretty well last season at Doncaster for McCann as well. But he only managed the 3 league starts and 1 sub appearance, and then was essentially ruled out for the season. But of course now, not knowing when the season's going to resume, you don't know whether he's going to make it back and play for us. But on the whole, a reasonably disappointing a loan spell for him. And then the other one, Marcus Maddison, similar sort of boat, but for different reasons. I mean, he managed 4 league starts, 3 sub appearances, and a goal, and he was sort of brought in as a very flashy attacking player who a lot of clubs have been after, but certainly looking at his sort of social media presence, looking at the comments of people around the club, both at Peterborough and in the media in Hull, around the fact that we're not looking at extending his deal into a permanent deal in the summer, suggests that he's probably fallen out of favour with the club as well. So probably 2 disappointing loan spells there.
It would be hard to argue otherwise. Herbie Kane, I'm sure he must have been good at Doncaster last year for McCann, but I haven't really seen anything that's particularly impressed me. I think whether it's just a different team and a different setup, and he just hasn't quite found his groove or whatever. But I've been pretty disappointed in him. Maddison, he's shown something, but I think there's got to be something behind the scenes. There's got to be an attitude issue or something that nobody seems to actually want to take him on permanently. And there was comments about from his manager or from the media about him not really even wanting to come to us, I think, but doing it because he otherwise wasn't going to get any game times where he was. So just like weird little things like that, which I'm sort of like, he sort of, I'll be disappointed to lose the talent that's there, but I think there's more to it than just that, and I think especially at a club like ours, you really need people who are committed to the cause, and I don't know if he is that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that's basically a wrap-up of all the midfield players that we've had. It always gets a bit vague when we're looking at wingers, so I included Bowler here, but we'll have Wilkes and others next week when we look at, or in a fortnight potentially, when we look at forwards. But I guess looking back at that list, who would probably be the name or 2 names that really stand out as potential players of the season that you can think of?
I think you have to put Lopez in there. He's been just a diamond in the rough, really. Of the others, probably the next best is Kevin Stewart, but I don't know if I could put him in a best of the season. I don't know, the injuries sort of count against him, but Yeah, it's probably those two as the best of that bunch.
And it says a lot, doesn't it? I mean, I'm looking at that list as well, and really, it is just Lopez and potentially Stewart. You'd maybe say Batty because he's had some pretty decent games as well, but even then, you're really kind of at a stretch to find a couple of players to name. And I guess that sort of highlights where our struggles have really been this season is not having a central three midfielders that can really support that attacking three and provide returns of their own. You know, we've barely got any goals or assists out of any of these players. Terrell, I think, is leading that group of players for assists, and you think, okay, so that means that the majority of assists probably came from Grzycki and Bowen, who are now no longer at the club. But as a side note, actually, when I was looking up assists of all of our midfield players in preparation for this podcast, and I was, I'll say shocked, but not so much when I think back on it, but George Long has 2 assists. So so Terrell has 3 assists to lead this group of players, and then George Long is equal on 2 with everyone else, you know, of those that had at least 2 assists. But, you know, I can remember one where he sort of picked the ball up for Bowen against, I want to say it was Wednesday, but QPR, I think it was, where Bowen scored the opener there, but I can't remember what the other one was. But I guess, or maybe it was Fulham or someone, but I guess it sort of makes sense with the style of play that we were playing. But it's pretty rare, I would think, that a goalkeeper would get 2 assists in a season.
Yeah, I think that really is something that highlights the problems that we're having in the midfield at the moment. Hopefully, you know, we'll bring in a couple over summer that will hopefully change that for next season. But yeah, I think the lack of assists through the midfield, you know, is definitely going to add up to, you know, lack of goals that we've seemed to see from a lot of our forwards. So
definitely,
just disappointing.
And it looks like Long's got the right idea. Then you just bypass the midfield, go straight for the forwards. But no worries. Thanks for joining me today, Dan, to go through all of the midfield.
No worries. Happy to do it.
And thank you everyone for listening in. We'll be back next week or the week after to go through all of our forwards and to then give our review of the potential player of the season. But until then, come on, City.
You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
Going higher and higher. There's no turning back.